Sometimes, things in life go terribly wrong. A young athlete develops a mysterious and debilitating condition.
We took a lot of different doctors. We couldn't find out what was wrong with him.
A healthy man's hands and feet suddenly turn black, and doctors recommend amputation.
No one had the guts to say anything. We were just too scared to see his reaction.
A teenager's tongue grows 5 times its natural size.
When he had a cold or was infected with an illness, he couldn't breathe.
A woman has something growing inside her, the size of an adult man.
My mother was going to die, and she was going to die really soon.
These people suffered one-of-a-kind conditions. Their lives depended on one-of-a-kind medical treatment. These are their amazing stories. Ed Cwalinski grew up as an only child in the quiet town of Dystonia, Pennsylvania, just north of Pittsburgh.
Oh, Eddie was always a good kid, good-natured, active in sports. He liked to go out with his friends, liked to swim, go camping.
Ed earned straight A's, excelled in baseball, and had plenty of friends. Then in junior high, he suddenly began experiencing odd pains.
Starting little cramps, this in his arms, cramps, this and that, and we wasn't paying no attention. We figured teenagers.
The cramps in his right hand became so bad that Ed taught himself to write left-handed. An orthopedist told Ed his shoulder blade was distorted and that he'd have to stop playing baseball.
That took a toll on me. Something I played for 11 years, then you have to give it up. You know, it's really tough.
And it got tougher. Over the next year, inexplicable muscle contractions began contorting Ed's body.
I would just have spasms coming off my back and to my head and throughout my limbs. They would just be shaking.
Doctors were baffled.
We took a lot of different doctors. We couldn't find out what was wrong with him. We took him so many different places.
Like, I don't know how a healthy child could turn into a distorted, unhappy child.
By 16, the spasms were constant, forcing Ed's body into painful contortions. He left school to be tutored at home and was hospitalized repeatedly.
I just couldn't take the spasms every day and the constant not being able to do anything by myself, you know. I didn't want to live anymore.
Because it come to a point where he was so bad, I was afraid to leave him home by himself.
Then one day, a glimmer of hope.
I just happened to pass the TV, and it was Dr. Baser and Dr. Whiting together talking about movement disorders. And I thought, well, these two doctors know what they're talking about. So I gave them a call.
The family met with Dr. Susan Baser, a neurologist at Pittsburgh's Allegheny General Hospital. But their hopes were quickly dashed.
All the testing we did came back negative, and he had no family history of movement disorder. There was no trauma, and it was just such a hyperacute presentation. There was really not an adequate explanation for his symptoms.
Dr. Baser suggested getting another opinion from the National Institutes of Health. There, experts finally diagnosed Ed with an extreme case of dystonia, a neurological condition that, in a milder form, affects 1 in 1,000 people. Though its origin is unknown, it is basically a malfunctioning of the brain cells that control muscle movement.
Normally, when you go to contract a muscle, like say your biceps muscle, you normally have to relax the opposite muscle, your triceps muscle. With dystonia, what happens, you have co-contraction, so both muscles will contract simultaneously and cause a sustained or abnormal posture.
Okay, go. Okay.
Most of the 300,000 cases of dystonia in the U.S. affect just one body part. Ed's type is extremely rare, affecting his entire body. Ed and his parents were told there is no cure.
That was devastating. And all I can imagine him in the rest of his life in a wheelchair.
There was one chance, an experimental surgery that could potentially restore Ed's muscle control. Dr. Bazer's colleague at Allegheny General Hospital, Dr. Donald Whiting, is one of the few neurosurgeons in the world with expertise in deep brain stimulation.
What we do is, with surgery, we put an electrode into that malfunctioning area to get it to fire correctly and to get everything back synchronous again.
With deep brain stimulation, an electrode is placed into the brain. Powered by a small battery implanted in the chest, it sends an electrical current through the hyperactive cells, slowing them down and stopping the contractions. The technique was first used in patients with other tremor disorders, like Parkinson's and MS. Dr. Whiting has refined the procedure and is now testing it for treatment of dystonia. But there are risks to the surgery.
With this particular type of surgery, there's a 1.5% chance of something bad happening, bleeding, stroke, coma, or even death. So it's not a risk-free kind of thing.
So do you want, okay, so you still want the win?
At 18, Ed would be the youngest person ever to undergo the procedure. Despite the risks and the lack of any guarantee that the experimental surgery would work, Ed and his parents jumped at the chance.
Eddie could not live the way he was. Eventually, he just would have died, I'm sure.
A computerized halo projecting specific coordinates of Ed's brain based on MRIs and CAT scans is screwed to his skull. It will guide Dr. Whiting to the exact area of the brain.
Our target area is probably about 6 millimeters by 8 millimeters in size, so it's very, very small. So what we need to do, number one, is be very accurate, because there's a lot of other important structures around that area, and it's kind of what we call high-priced real estate in that area, because everything within every millimeter or two, there's something different that's very, very important.
A small hole is drilled into Ed's skull. A micro-recording electrode, thinner than a human hair, is slowly inserted into the brain. The electrode is fine enough to slip through the neural pathways without causing damage. Ed is sedated, but awake enough to communicate, so doctors can avoid critical speech and memory portions of his brain. The tiny electrode slowly passes through and transmits the sounds of millions of Ed's brain cells.
So as you pass through the different layers of nerve cells, they have certain characteristics. You listen to them, and certain cells fire or make a popping noise on the monitor at a certain rate. You hear pop, 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 and then you go through areas that are electrically silent.
To the untrained ear, it sounds like static. But to an experienced neurosurgeon, the overactive cells sound different.
Sometimes we'll say the sound of popcorn popping is whenever you have a tremor cell. It sounds sort of like popcorn popping in the microwave.
Once the hyperactive cells are located, a low-level current is passed through the electrode. This is the moment of truth. If the deep brain stimulation is going to work for Ed, there should be some clear indication almost immediately. As soon as the electrode is activated, Dr. Bazer, who's been by Ed's side throughout the surgery, notices something. Ed's hand has stopped contracting.
What do you feel? My hand. Okay, good. It was just miraculous. It was more than I could have ever expected.
The change is dramatic, far exceeding everyone's expectations. Within days, Ed's regained control of his body. For the first time in years, he is not suffering painful contractions.
I just felt relaxed for the first time in 2 years. It felt so good, you know, to have some kind of relief.
Edward Jason Cwalinski.
A month after his surgery, Ed walked across the stage to receive his high school diploma.
They all gave me a standing ovation, and I felt pretty good. Yeah.
The only problem Ed's had since his surgery is having a battery run out of power. When that happens, his symptoms immediately return.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it for showing up. Thanks for supporting me through our rough times. I appreciate it.
Ed's one of the most dramatic examples I've ever seen. We're controlling the symptoms, and there's no reason to suspect that as long as the disease doesn't progress rapidly, we shouldn't be able to keep those under control.
It definitely gave me that life back.